Your Honor, it's been a long 6 years. What were your first thoughts walking out of that courtroom last week when those impact statements wrapped up?
That this case finally was resolved for this community. And so let me explain a little bit about how much I got wrapped up in this case. It was 5 years, 8 months, and 16 days. A lot of people say 5.5, a lot of them say 6, but 5 years, 8 months, and 16 days since this happened. This case could have probably gone on maybe 3 or 4 more years, depending on rulings that I would have had to make and the appellate process, how long it was going to take. And there would have been an attempt to try to pick a jury here. And if that didn't happen, then start all over somewhere else. So for this to have been resolved when it was, in spite of this community thinking it took forever, was a relief that we can, or that this community can start a healing process.
Yeah. And we were just talking here not too long ago. You told me this is your first interview here with, aside from Dateline and your campaigning. Why now? Why now talk to us about this importance of talking about this case that really impacted you and our whole community for such a long time?
I think over the last 2 days last week, a lot of people were trying to figure out how the hug happened. And so there's been a lot of talk about that. And whether we want to accept it or not, this is the biggest mass shooting case in U.S. history that was supposed to go to trial. Most shooters die by killing themselves or by police killing them. And so this was a unique situation that no other city has had to go through. And so I could see the value of people wanting to know a little bit more about how it was going, and I guess who was one of the quietest ones of all the parties, and that would have been me, because you don't talk, you sit there and rule, and nobody gets to know your thoughts or where you were going with this. Yeah.
But you weren't so quiet though at the impact statements. We actually saw a very powerful moment coming from you. Talk to us about that. You said that was also a first for you, speaking.
I was going to say, not only is this my first local interview, I have never addressed a defendant either after a plea of guilty or a jury coming back and me sentencing them. I've never done it. I've just...
what moved you?
We were going to have victim impact statements from the people who were most victims, the people who lost loved ones or the people who were hurt. But everybody in this community was a victim. And I believed that somebody needed to talk for the first responders who had to show up to that scene, and for every other person who was shocked that this happened. And so I was probably in the best position to make statements on their behalf. But that was difficult. I didn't know if I had the words to say anything that would be impactful or that this community would understand. And so I now know why I don't do that. I've never done that, but I just believed that this case merited me speaking up for the first time in my career.
Were you able to receive any feedback after that day that you decided to speak up, or was it kind of just silent after?
No, I've gotten so much feedback that I'm humbled, because a lot of the family members used the same words that I did. I'm not saying that they use those words because I said them. I got lucky that I was able to touch or see into their heart, and them talking about healing, how he didn't, his mission failed, he didn't win, he lost, we didn't fall apart, we got stronger, we became more loving, we became more unified. So it really, I was so happy that I was able to say the things that my community were feeling. So I've gotten, I have a lot of contacts on my phone. I've got numbers I don't have contacts to that have texted me, and it was very reaffirming that I probably made the right choice of saying something that day.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, this is one of the deadliest mass shootings that the country ever saw, labeled as one of the worst hate crimes against Latinos in U.S. history. Do you believe justice was truly served?
I see both sides. I see why this should have been resolved, and I see why a lot of people wanted to see the ultimate punishment. Having done this is my 29th year on the bench, my 25th year as a district court judge. I can tell you that the victims could probably be deceased before the ultimate punishment would have been carried out. We just had an El Paso capital murder defendant get a stay of execution. I was in the DA's office in 1992 when he was convicted. He's been on death row for 32 years. And if and when those families needed healing, they may not see him be put to death. And the process would have taken 10, 20, maybe 33 years like this other case. Neither side is wrong in wanting this resolved. Neither side is right in wanting a different result. So that's a very hard question to answer. Was justice served? I hope it was.
And hearing you talk about just how long some of the process is in some cases, it seems like there's some hurdles with the justice system. There are some moments that I know in the last nearly 6 years that didn't feel real, even since the beginning of it all. For example, the chaos with the Rosales administration. What gaps have you seen in the last 29 years that you just mentioned in the justice system that this case may be exposed that need a little bit of fine-tuning?
I love our justice system. It is the best in the world. And even when you compare it to the federal system, I love the justice system in the state of Texas. I don't necessarily think there are flaws in our justice system. I was absolutely astonished at how complicated this case got from the very beginning. This case shouldn't have gotten that difficult early on. The Rosales administration really did a disservice to this community, not only in this case, but all the other cases that they had in their system at the time. We ran into an absolute perfect storm of difficulty. An administration, the DA was retiring after something like 28 years. The federal government chose to get involved before we did. The pandemic happened. The Rosales administration was involved in some things that needed to be investigated before we moved forward. We had that current DA and their first assistant plead the Fifth Amendment over 25 times on when being questioned about their involvement in tampering with one of their own victims or other things that were happening in that office. Then a new administration took over, and then there were other concerns about some misconduct or some hiding of evidence. And this, we never even got to the pretrial motions dealing with whether some evidence should be suppressed, what evidence may or may not be coming in. We hadn't even gotten to that point. then there was an appeal of some matters that I had ruled on. And so we were basically in a holding pattern while the Court of Criminal Appeals was about to rule on it. So even though, believe it or not, the 5 years and 8 months is still not unheard of when dealing with a case like this. This is a case that there is no road to follow to see what was going on. Yeah. And so, I think it was more the people who were involved versus the system that we have.
Okay. And like you mentioned, this is a national case. Everybody at one point was talking about this. Looking at the numbers, Judge, I did see that a JAMA report found there were more than 4,000 mass shootings in the U.S., and that study was conducted back in 2023, so unfortunately that number is way higher than it is back then. Did this bring up a conversation that there is a need for stronger hate crime legislation at the state or national level?
That is a decision by our legislators, but whatever hate crime legislation we have isn't working. The access to items on the internet for people who can't handle them, the access to weapons at such a young age is overwhelming our youth, because most of our mass shooters are young. And so there are some people who say guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, they're killing them with guns. And so I don't necessarily think that more hate crime legislation would affect those type of people. There's other things that need to be dealt with and discussed to try to bring this down. Yeah.
And another big conversation that came out of this incident that took place in 2019 was mental health. Your Honor, there are multiple studies conducted that show there's not a strong correlation with mental illness in mass shootings and murderers. We did get the chance to sit down with Mr. Spencer last week to ask him about Crucius being competent enough to stand trial, which he then responded saying that the standard in Texas is very low to stand trial. Should that be looked over when it comes to cases involving mental health?
I don't think so. There's a difference between competency and insanity. Okay. I think the insanity standard's high enough. Okay. Was the person at the time suffering from any mental defect that could cause them not to understand the difference between right and wrong in what they were doing? And that standard's pretty high. There had to have been some mental defect or issues before a certain age. And so that's a high standard. To go to trial, the standard I think is okay. Do you, Ms. Clark, understand who the judge is? Mm-hmm. Yes. Do you understand the charges against you? Yes. Do you understand what the prosecutor's role is? Do you understand what my role is? Can you help me as your defense lawyer in coming up with ways to defend you? That's all you need to go forward with competency. You go to trial and you want to do an insanity defense, it's a higher, different standard as to what you were thinking or what you couldn't control at the time that the crime was being committed. So, there's some method to the madness in the things we do in the justice system. Yeah. It's our job, the people who are in it, to try to better explain it to everybody else, because they mix both up at the same time, and it brings more frustration and anger to the people who don't understand those things. And it's up to us to do a better job of educating our public as to what those things are.
Yeah, and it takes moments like this to get those answers. So we're so appreciative with that. Going back to these personally for you, how did you ensure that the trial remained fair and impartial given the magnitude of this case, and you being from here as well?
That was my number one goal and my biggest fear. We have a right to have this case resolved in El Paso County, where this happened. And my job as the jurist is to ensure that everyone, even people that this community hates, gets a right to a fair trial. I've always believed that if the lowest, most hated person in our community or in this country can't get a fair trial, one day us good people will be found to be the people everybody doesn't like, and we won't have a right to a fair trial. That was my biggest concern, to be able to accomplish this, whether it was through a plea or even a trial, is that when it was said and done, that no one in this country ever looked at El Paso and said, well, of course, that's the result. Of course it was going to happen like that. It was inevitable. I wanted everybody, when this was done, to have continued confidence in their system of justice working during the most trying times in the community. And so that was my biggest goal and my biggest concern, is if I was going to be able to ensure that happened. And I hope that history shows that that's what happened in this community.
It's it doesn't surprise me, but even hearing your response, and it seems like you're still looking over the community. But what about for yourself? Coming in, I kind of asked you, like, how are you doing? And you're like, okay, this weekend was kind of the first weekend I feel like you could take a deep breath. Where are you at now personally with your mental health and all of this after last week?
I have the best wife, the best family, my sister, my mom, and the best friends in the world. One of the things that people don't understand about being in charge of a case like this in this community, I was isolated from my community, and I was detached from even my colleagues, because although we wear the same shoes, no one's ever had to deal with a case like this. I couldn't call a judge in Detroit or in South Carolina or in Denver and ask him, hey, tell me about the case that you dealt with and tell me how you deal with it, because there's no road with regard to where we were. So I had very little people to be able to seek guidance and counsel when it came to being detached. The isolation had to happen. That's my job, to be a member of this community and do my job of ensuring that justice happened. What that meant for me is I haven't been to any of these memorials.
Wow.
I've never been to one of these anniversaries. And I've had to rely on that isolation to be able to deal with it with my family and friends. And that really, I think they know it. But that really helped. We were in a pandemic. We were isolated from the world for the first time, and that was hard. And then on top of that, when we got out of it, then I had to see all the El Paso Strong bumper stickers, see that there was some kind of memorial put up at Walmart, see that there's one at Escalante Park, and I think there was one at the park near Burgess High School. Mm-hmm. I can't comment on them. I can't feel for somebody. And so that is part of the price that judges must pay, so that there's confidence in their rulings and their decisions by anybody who's looking at what's going on in a courtroom. I've known that, I've understood that. This was a little bit more intensified because of the magnitude of this crime.
You push the limits, yeah.
Yeah.
Your Honor, any last message you have for anyone watching that may be struggling with the outcome of last week, or even processing still the impact statements that we heard last week. Do you have a special message you want to share with them?
The most important thing I was reminded of on Monday and Tuesday is just how beautiful this community is. The Sun Bowl is known as is the friendliest bowl game, and that people go out of their way when they have teams come in for the Sun Bowl. And yes, last week just reinforced in me that this is a beautiful place to live. That when Miss Tinajero said, if you had gotten to know us, you would have been invited to breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and you would have gotten to see who we are. And as much hurt that this community has gone through since 2019, it was absolutely refreshing to hear the humanity that this community not only continues to have, but that they continue to have for somebody. Somebody last week used the phrase, forgiving the unforgivable. And that's El Paso. And so I hope his name and his deeds are behind us, and that a road to healing and being a better city than we are today and that we were in 2019 is going to happen, and I'm confident it will. And so that's the hopefulness that I have in the community that we all share. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Judge Medrano, anything that I'm missing that you want to add to before I conclude this interview?
No, thank you for having me on. Thank you for one of the things that, there were so many meetings that I had in preparing for the plea. I met with the media, I met with the lawyers, I met with my security detail, and I told the media, I want to thank them because they have been so professional in dealing with something that could have been sensationalized. And it's the mainstream media, not the guy that owns a phone that says he's a journalist. I'm talking about the mainstream media. Did an outstanding job with this case in educating the community, in helping them understand why things were happening the way they were and why the process worked that way. And so, again, I just want to thank all the mainstream media because of their professionalism. We didn't take this to make an angry mob of this community. We took this and tried to let this community know the processes that we were going through and why it was necessary to go through that. So that's my last thank you to you all for doing that.
Well, we appreciate it. It takes people like everyone here to get that going.
It does.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Judge, and this wraps it up. Yes, thank you
you
so much. Yeah.